There you go. Well, welcome everybody to Bob the Father. So this is the last one for the month. Next week we'll do Friends for Faith, and I think we're going to talk about the Assumption of Mary at that one. So primarily, like, why is it necessary and why is it fitting, kind of idea. So that would be the top discussion for next week, which would be August 6th, the Feast of the Transfiguration. How about that? So, but tonight we're Bob the Father, so open discussion. Feel free to ask whatever you want.
All right, how about a little info about blasphemy?
Okay, I imagine this is in context with what happened at the Olympics maybe a few nights ago. Yeah. Good. So, how do we? Does anyone know how we define blasphemy, like in a technical sense?
Isn't it something with it's a sin against God versus
Yeah, I mean, so you could say that sin itself is a blasphemy,
well,
right?
but
Yeah.
it's versus something against man. It's
Okay. Yeah, so that's a key, right? So, in other words, it is an action or word that is against the word or the teachings of Jesus, or like against God himself, right? So in that case, it would be sinful, right? Because any act against God is considered to be a sin. But there are different forms of that, right? So unfortunately, like there was an example a few years ago, actually, I found out from a friend of mine who used to work at Boeing. They had a problem with there was a priest on there that apparently did something very, very illicit on the altar with somebody else, right? And so, yeah, that is not only just an act against chastity for that priest, against the priest's vows, which itself would be a mortal sin, but to compound it by making it in that space would definitely be a blasphemy situation. So there's been a lot of discussion recently, of course, about what happened with the Paris Olympics, that there were some depictions that were thought to be a mockery of the Christian faith. And I think objectively you can look at that and say, yeah, there probably may have been some. Now, whether that was intentional or not, well, the fact that they came out and apologized seemed like there was at least some intention.
Did they though?
Well, there's an attempt maybe. There was an attempt maybe. So I want to be charitable because obviously, we don't want to make absolutes when it comes to this. Because here's the thing, we can't necessarily tell the hearts of people, right? And so whether there was an action of actual like, well, we're trying to be inclusive, and we thought this was an inclusive way of doing it. Okay. Now you could say, could there have been better prudence in that to find a better way that had been more maybe not so centralized on something that people hold dear? Probably. I think we can say that. And in that respect, we can maybe be somewhat forgiving in our approach to those people. But yeah, I think you can definitely say objectively that all things being equal, to depict Jesus, the Last Supper, and his disciples in the way it was depicted brought offense, right? And not just a human offense, but kind of the fact that you had particular people that were living a lifestyle that was in direct contradiction to Jesus and the laws of God and laws of his church would be considered blasphemous objectively, right? So we can say, well, maybe you didn't know, maybe there was some imprudence involved, maybe there was the intention was maybe in a good place, yet the means of coming about was problematic. Sure, because what we want to be very clear about is there is a difference between something that's ethical and something that's sinful. Okay, so ethics is objective, right? So I can say, hey, you know what? There's somebody robbing a bank. That is a bad action, right? And when it comes to ethics, there's the kind of three aspects of that. There is the act itself, the object of the act, the intention of the agent, and the circumstances surrounding it. Now, to be something that is considered to be immoral, a bad ethical action, only one of those needs to be bad, right? So in other words, I can do a good act, but with bad intention. That's still an immoral thing to do, right? Sin, though, is always subjective. So in other words, if I see somebody robbing a bank, I can say that's a bad action. I can't say that that person that's doing it is committing a sin. Only that person and God can tell if that person is committing a sin. Because the action itself, objectively, you can say is bad, But again, what does the person understand? What does the person know? Is the person committing an action being compelled to do that in some way? In which case, maybe the act itself is reduced in the culpability. So maybe an example might be if someone, let's say your family's being held hostage and someone's forced you to go rob the bank. And if they don't rob the bank, they're going to kill your family. I'm not willing that. Even though I may know it's wrong to do this, I'm not willing the action because I'm being compelled to do it to save a life. And even though the action might be wrong, the sin might fall on the person that's holding the family hostage, not so much on the person actually robbing the bank. Does that make sense?
It does make sense.
Okay.
But
Yeah.
that doesn't mean I have to sit back and say I don't like it.
Oh, totally, Connie, totally. So I think what we're talking about here, especially this action of the picture of the Last Supper at the Paris Olympics,
We can, yeah, we don't have.
we can say, you know what, I can understand that this is an action that happened, and I maybe have no control over it, and I can acknowledge the reality of it. I can even acknowledge that the people depicted there of being like, well, you know, hey, you maybe you were given the job, maybe this was a gig you took, and you know, I know you're trying to feed yourself and your family. Fine, but that doesn't mean you have to condone it. So in other words, when we talk about things like tolerance, right? What tolerance is a recognition of reality, right? And the recognition here would be like, yeah, there's bad things that happen, right? And there's even persecution that happens against Christians. And in reality, if I'm following my faith correctly, I should bear that joyfully and offer that up to God and say, Lord, this is an act of persecution against me and my faith. I bear it as you bear the cross, and I'm going to bear it gladly. But that doesn't mean that I say what they're doing is good, right? That these things are depicted, these actions are being done. We should actually encourage that and want that to happen. No. So in other words, tolerance means I can bear these things well and even joyfully. But that doesn't mean I will it to keep on happening or will it, or even declare a lie, which is that it's a good thing.
I think that because we are Christians
Mhm.
and we're supposed to turn the other cheek, people mistake turning the other cheek for allowing
Being
things to
meek.
happen. And it's
Yeah,
okay.
being rolled over. Yeah, no, and that's actually a very. I think that interpretation of Jesus' teaching is actually very surface level, right? Because what Jesus is really saying in this action by turning their cheek is, yeah, bear it, right? You can, by turning the other cheek, what you're saying is that didn't hurt, do it again, right?
Well, he didn't turn the other cheek in
No.
the temple when he took up the
No, he
bread.
didn't. But he did. But in a way, there's a turning of the cheek, and there's actually a call to action, right? That is actually in line with God's will. So in other words, okay, if you're going to punch me, I can bear that. That's fine. You know, I'm tough enough that I can actually bear that and not let it affect me too deeply. But also, if I see wrong being done, I have an obligation to not only call out the wrong, but also to help the others understand what they're doing is wrong, right? And that's where the non-condoning comes into play, right? So you made a mockery of my faith. Well, that's not good, and I'm going to survive that because my faith is stronger than your mockery. But I don't think what you're doing is right, and here's why, right? By trying to be inclusive and trying to engage in that way of tolerance, you're actually excluding at least 2 billion, if not more, people in that. And that's a rational argument you can make, saying, well, now I can understand how you're saying, well, you know, shouldn't we be open to people with different understanding, different backgrounds, different lifestyles? Again, I can tolerate that. I can acknowledge the reality that it happens. That doesn't mean I condone it, right? I can still say living that lifestyle is not good for you or even the people around you. And here's why. What that should drive us to is evangelization and actually a relationship, right? That I wish if I could, I would actually go and have a conversation with those people depicted and say, you know, here's how this could be construed as offensive. And also, you know, God has a plan for you. that's bigger than your sexuality or the way you define yourself. And let's come to an understanding of how you're living your life, if that's actually good in the long run for you, right? Now, granted, I'm not going straight to the faith aspect. I'm trying to engage someone in a relationship to actually help them get to the point where God wants them to be. I always say evangelization doesn't start with let's talk about Jesus. It talks about let's talk about your children. Let's talk about the Cardinals. Let's talk about these aspects that you appreciate, right? Because relationship is how you actually help people to grow in their appreciation of how you live your life and what you're talking about.
Right, but just like Bishop Barron said, we don't have to sit back and do nothing.
No.
We can take action. We can,
No.
you know,
No, I think a
right.
healthy reaction, which I think
Committee
is being enacted here, is boycotting certain. I mean,
or just just writing and saying we were offended.
yeah. There was
Very
a
offensive.
I know there was some priests, and even I think Bishop Barron was calling for this.
Barron.
Is that to boycott the Olympics? Now, here's the thing. Personally, I don't care about the Olympics. I'm sorry, I don't. I got other things to do. But to boycott the Olympics may not be the best action because, and this can be, I think, discerned and discussed too, because the thought is by boycotting the Olympics, you're actually hurting the athletes. I don't know if that's a compelling argument personally, because I think if an athlete goes to the Olympics and competes, that's what they're there for anyway. It doesn't matter if I watch or not. They're there to actually compete with the best in the world. So go at it. Good, great, awesome. I think a better reaction would be to look at the sponsors that are supporting the Olympics and then maybe boycott them.
Well, that's
Right.
some pulled up.
Yeah, and I would say that good.
Or write the
Right.
committee, the Olympic
But
committee, and say
you
you're
know
offended.
what was exciting was to see, was it Saturday night, the streets of Paris full of people singing Ave Maria.
Oh, that's good. I didn't realize that. I didn't hear that.
Oh,
Yeah.
thousands of people.
Oh, that's awesome.
It was phenomenal. I saw it on Facebook. That's what I know.
Good.
I mean, there are a lot of people. It was just a few that caused this.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's always like that, just a few.
Yeah, so I think that's important to recognize too, Connie, that it's not. I think a lot of these things that are done are not being done by a majority of people. I think most people in reality kind of have a mutual respect for each other and say that even us as Catholics, we can look at someone who's, let's say, Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, and say, look, you have a religion that's different than mine. There's some similarities there. We can look at those things, but for the most part, you have a different worldview, and okay, right? If you want to discuss that, let's do that. Because we shouldn't necessarily fear those discussions, because if we truly believe we have the truth on our side, then that's all we need to know, right? But also, that is, again, I think that's good that there's a reaction of one of prayer and unity, because I think ultimately that's how you kind of overcome these things. Because here's the thing: this is nothing new, right? Throughout the whole history of the church, there's always been experience of blasphemy. That, unfortunately, right? That's an act of the evil one, and we believe the evil one exists, and they believe the evil one wants to work against our church. As much as people want to avoid that discussion, the truth is, if there's a good, there has to be an evil. That's just how things work. So this isn't anything new, and how we react to it really should find us not only as our faith, but as people. To actually, not condone it, but look at this as an opportunity to grow in our faith and our love of God in it. Right? Maybe appreciate more the fact I do have a faith that draws me to this feeling of anger that would be righteous and that's virtuous, right? And zealous. That means God's working in our hearts, so praise God.
I think Bishop Barron was calling for fasting and prayer.
Yeah, I would agree. Fasting and prayer always works out best typically. Right? So in general, I mean, there are many different acts of blasphemy, and actually, to tell you the truth, many of us probably commit them every day. And the thing is, but the question is, are we sorry for it or not? Right? Which is why we have a sacrament, several sacraments that actually help us with that heal us of those things and help us to grow, to avoid those ways of blasphemy. Some are more formal than others, and that's kind of how we can look at those things.
How could we commit blasphemy every day?
Sin. If we define sin, blasphemy as an action or a word against God's will, well, sin is a blasphemy automatically. Right? Now, that's more of a, I always look at it this way. Like we look at the commandments. The first commandment. All the commandments themselves are not just the literal words that were given to Moses on Mount Sinai. They expand in different aspects, right? So if you look at like the first commandment in general, which is really kind of when you look at blasphemy, that's what we're violating formally by blasphemy. So the action that happened in Paris, we would say, provided there was full understanding and full act of the will for the people that were participating in that, the sin comes against the first commandment, right? Not putting God first in our life. Now, formally, primarily what that looks at is like things of the occult. So in other words, if I were to go to a tarot card reader or a crystal ball or even read the horoscope of the paper, right, with the intention of kind of like, gleaning something out of that's really kind of, I hold to be true and good. That's not great, right? Ouija boards, all these kind of things. It's not that the church teaches that there isn't something to be learned from them. And here's where I think that the real misunderstanding comes into play. The problem with these other forms of mediums and other things like that is that you don't know who you're communing with. You may very well be communing with a good spirit or with grandma. We read in the Old Testament from Samuel that Saul, after the death of Samuel, he went to a medium to bring about Samuel, and Samuel appeared. Right? I mean, at least we think it's Samuel. I mean, we don't really know for sure. And Samuel's message to Saul was like, "Hey, by the way, you're going to die tomorrow. So whatever." So in other words, the church doesn't teach that these things don't work. The problem is we don't know who we're actually communing with, and it's best then in those circumstances to avoid it completely, because we actually do know ways that does work, right? Prayer, contemplative prayer, meditative prayer, rote prayers. These are ways we can meet with God and others in the church triumphant, the church suffering, that we know work, and we can be assured we're actually communing with the right spirit. Where these other forms, maybe, right? But to that point, any sin that we commit then is a violation of the first commandment, because we're not putting God first when we sin, right? I'm putting something else in God's place when I sin. Maybe that's myself, right? Maybe that's money. Maybe that's sex. Maybe that's food.
Shiny.
Right. So whenever we sin, we're always breaking that first commandment automatically. Now, granted, no one comes in on every confession is like, I broke the first commandment. It's implied. So let's just keep that in mind, right? But yeah, every time we sin, we violate the first commandment, which means, we're committing blasphemy. Right? Because there are gradations of those things too.
I'm in trouble then because I enjoyed a good horoscope.
Well, I mean, I think there's difference. Well, I think there's difference in kind between doing those things for entertainment value and doing those things with an idea that I'm putting some faith into this.
Yeah,
right? Yeah. So, but I mean, I think
purely for entertainment.
Yeah. I think the other aspect of that too is the problem also is we don't necessarily sure what we're letting in, even if we're doing it for entertainment purposes. Am I kind of allowing something happening here that maybe wouldn't be best for me or the people around me?
I must admit I don't do it anymore,
Yeah.
but there was a time I really liked to read it and think, well, what's true about this in my life, or is there anything true about it, whatever.
Well, I mean, I think it's the same thing like with fortune cookies, right? I mean, they're so general that it's like, well, sure, you're going to have a great day today at some point. Oh, okay, well, yeah, I'm sure I will. Yeah. So, yeah, I don't know. I think the same thing you see with like mediums typically. I mean, if you look at a lot of mediums really have some psychological background where they're really just kind of looking at people's psyches in general and kind of throwing things out there that can be very broad. And then they kind of deduce down based on the interactions and the answer to the questions. I don't know. Maybe I'm telling too much about myself, but if you guys ever seen South Park, the show
Yes.
South Park, So there's
You
a,
like South
I, let's put it this way. I think South Park has value.
My husband loves South
So
Park.
does.
I say that just
It's
because
clever.
there is. There actually
It's
when you
very-
watch the South Parks,
it's
even
very
as kind of
clever.
like, you know, as kind of risque as they are with some of the language and
Yeah,
some
well,
of the
it's-
storylines,
it's
there's
really
always kind of a
clever.
moral they produce. Now they may do that
Yes.
sarcastically,
No,
but there is a
yeah.
moral that comes out of it that's sort of like, okay. Well, they were doing one about with John Edwards, the medium that was on TV, and you know they were kind of saying how, like, you know, they would go to that show and they're like, okay, I'm getting a C. You know, so it's like, oh yeah. So I mean, out of a studio audience of like 400 people, you're gonna get some people's like, oh, I know someone who goes to C. Yeah, because they're kind of hedging their bets, saying that based on the statistic I have here, someone's going to have some experience. I'm throwing out there broadly. I'm going to reduce down to the particulars to kind of help them with whatever, right? So now South Park was mocking it, and rightly so. Good,
Yes.
right? So maybe that's all about me that you didn't want to know. I
You're
don't know.
too young. That for a long time on KMOX radio in the evening, Jim White once a week would have, I forget the guy's name, but I misplaced my car keys or my $50 gold piece or whatever. Well, go look, and there it was, or
Yeah,
whatever,
right.
you know. And I enjoyed those programs, you know. But it was just for the entertainment
Yeah.
value. you
Well,
know.
also, how many of those were really staged too?
Well,
Yeah, all right. I
but
mean, so yeah. Again, I mean, I think we want to have a difference in kind between putting faith in these things and then actually like doing for entertainment. But again, we want to be cautious, really, even though it's interactive. So yeah, good.
You know what bothers me about a lot of this sort of information? It never was taught to me in school.
We mean like what information?
Like why Ouija boards are bad,
Oh.
and that the devil really exists. I mean, it was just glossed over my entire life to the point where the devil was like Santa Claus.
Yeah. Well, you know, the only thing I can really say to that, Connie, and you know, the question was for like, you know, kind of part of this is why aren't these things explained better in schools or, you know, in the formation? You know, the only thing I can say about that is
Nobody wants
if
to
you
hear
look at
it.
the wide breadth of the teachings of the church, I think when you have someone, even for only like, I mean, so like we had a religion class every day in grade school and in
I
high
did.
school.
I mean, I went to a Catholic grade
Right.
school.
But I mean, even then, I mean, we have this problem with RCIA. I'm sure it's like OCIA. How do I condense down the whole teaching of the Catholic Church to 1 hour Sunday for the next 28 Sundays or 33 Sundays, whatever it is? Possible. I can't. I think in the same way, I mean, even over here, how can I condense down for 1 hour a day, or even 180 days, or whatever it is, the full teaching of the Catholic Church to a second grader, or to a third grader, or to a fourth grader? I think some of the problem that we have here is that, like, let's say, for instance, the sacraments. You're probably taught about the sacraments maybe in your second grade year, which we try to do a very good job of that, right? But then when do you ever talk about it again? When does it come up? When does it come up in the curriculum again, to where it's kind of a part of that discussion? Well, maybe confirmation. Maybe the sacraments talked about in second grade are just kind of the basics of like reconciliation and Eucharist. And then confirmation, you might talk about baptism in relationship to that, but anointing of the sick, marriage, holy orders, maybe you get into high school and let's talk about that. And so I think part of that is, well, you know, how do you discern what needs to be said when, and kind of condition to a particular age group? And then I think what's lost here, and this is I think where the disconnect is, because this was never explained to me either. There's a responsibility on the part of the agent to themselves then grow in these things and seek these answers and grow in these solutions, which I don't know if ever happens. I think most people walk around, you know, we tend to grow, you know, physically, intellectually, emotionally, and we mature in those ways. But I think most people have maybe an 8th grade maturity level when it comes to our spirituality. Because most people after confirmation don't, they think it's like graduation, I'm done. Now, I don't know. I can't say for particular generations. I think for my generation, that was kind of the understanding. Was you're an adult now in the church. You're done. Oh, okay, cool. Now, I even went to Catholic high school, right? And even though they taught certain things, they didn't reiterate the stuff that was taught in grade school. They kind of moved on from there, right? And maybe that should be how it is. But I can't recall a time after maybe eighth grade we actually talked in depth about the sacraments and what they are and what they mean, and or even like some of the theology behind Mary. I don't recall a time we ever talked about why the Assumption or why
Yeah.
how Mary was immaculately conceived or anything like that, because maybe the teachers really have an understanding of it either, right? And I think part of that's the disconnect between you had a time where you had religious orders teaching these things, and then there was a switch to lay people teaching them. And not to say that lay people can't teach them, it's just that, well, you're trying to have someone who was maybe trained teaching English now trying to teach religion, and their understanding of it may not necessarily be there either, right? So I can't say for sure. I think there's a lot of different factors go into it, which is why I hope this is helpful.
Well, it certainly is.
Okay. Because, I mean, I hope that we share things that are kind of helpful for everyone.
You know what? You're right. It was my responsibility, and I didn't do it until I came back to the church, because when I was in college, I couldn't be bothered. And then when I left this country and taught in Australia, I couldn't be bothered.
Yeah.
And then when I got married and had children, I came back.
Right.
But I still didn't have a grasp.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very common story, Connie. I mean, I think even as someone who's living their faith even nominally, like I can tell you my personal experience. In college, I was considered to be like the holy one because I would go to mass on Sunday. That's all I would do. For me, that's what I did, right? And I did find comforts because it was a place that was familiar, but also like that was it. I would go to mass on Sunday. I'm sure it was Saturday night because I wouldn't sleep on Sunday, and then I wouldn't study all day Sunday afternoon. When we were in college, there are different priorities, right? I mean, a lot of times the priority came to, well, I'm in a fraternity, so I got to do this stuff, and then also I need to get my grades. I need to maintain my grade point average and get my studies done. And if a girl came into life, great, but if not, okay, I got other priorities going on. And I can tell you, faith was not my priority in college. And if you would say, well, you were faithful because you went to mass every Sunday, okay, that was the bare minimum. I wasn't praying every day. I wasn't, I would do the tenets of the church, the bare minimum, right? And even that I wouldn't do it because I didn't give it to the church. I didn't maintain the needs of the church, in that respect. But I would go to confession once a year. I would go to mass every Sunday. I would fast on the days I was supposed to fast, and I would not eat meat on Fridays and wine. That was my faith, basically, all through college, even my 30s. That was it.
Well, my problem was I was agnostic. I just didn't know.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know I learned everything, but so to me, it was like Santa Claus.
Yeah. Well, I think we see that even too, like when we're taught to pray. I mean, most people when they turn to prayer, it's usually when they need something or want something. And so in that case, we kind of turn God into a Santa Claus. But the problem is, at least with Santa Claus, well, I might get what I want. With God, I might not get what I want. And so that kind of turns our faith off in some ways too, right?
It wasn't until I got into Alcoholics Anonymous and I had the miracle happen that I realized that there really is a God.
Yeah.
That turned my whole life around.
But I think also too, though,
Yeah.
even being agnostic, here's the thing, I appreciate someone who's agnostic. Because at least there's an openness. Rather than a flat-out atheist. Now, we can argue whether it actually is atheist today or not, what they really are or not. I don't, whatever. But at least with an agnostic, you can kind of like at least talk to them, discuss it, at least look at reasons why there may be a God, right? And I think most people are probably agnostic in some way, right? Because, I mean, even Catholics that come to Mass, I mean, I think there's some like recognition that, well, I'm doing this maybe because of cultural reasons or because I want to maybe hedge my bets, right? There's sort of logical argument about like, well, what I think it was, I can't remember, it was, I know Mark Twain kind of promoted this, but I think Einstein actually promoted this too, is that, Einstein believed in the deity, a God, just because the rationale he had was, well, if I believe in God and there ends up being no God, at least I can leave my legacy of living a good moral life that's actually effective for others and be remembered. And if there is a God and I live my life for God, well, hey, I get a just reward. But if I live my life as if there is no God and there is a God, or I'm sorry, there is no God, then I haven't really harmed anybody. But if I live my life as if there is no God and there really is a God, well, that's the worst extreme you can possibly receive, right? So the logical argument kind of makes sense, but also it's like it's sort of a half in, half out way of approaching faith, right? Because we shouldn't do these things because we fear eternal punishment or eternal reward. It's because this is a way of life to lead that actually is better for everyone, including me, right? But Einstein was Jewish, so we can maybe let him off the hook for that. He didn't necessarily have a Christian mentality, even though, but yeah, I think that's important to recognize. I think we have people in our pews that have that same logical argument. Well, I'm here because I want the reward. Okay, good. Nothing wrong with that. Or I fear the punishment. Okay, well, again, nothing wrong with that. But are you really fully alive in your faith that actually lets you do wonderful things and actually lives a life that's good for you? And if that's the limitation, or maybe that's the extent of your understanding, well, boy, how do you deal with things go bad in this life? Right? That seems like there's a problem there. Because that's bound to happen for everybody in some way or another. Good. Any other thoughts, comments?
I have to have God to turn to, and then I've had this feeling, belief. I think I'm saving myself doctor bills, insurance, just by going to confession. I'm not paying a psychiatrist. I'm going to directly with God.
Well, that is the fourth and fifth step with Alcoholics Anonymous. You write down all your stuff, and then you give it to another person and God.
Mm-hmm.
And so there you go.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think it's interesting that I know Bill W. was not, I think it was Presbyterian maybe, but he was not, but his spiritual director was a Catholic Jesuit priest, right? And as a matter of fact, the spiritual director for him, what he saw in relation to the development of the 12 steps was kind of similar to what Ignatius did in his Discernment of Spirits. And he saw a correlation there. And that's why when we approached, Bill W., he was kind of like asking about that, but he had no idea. Bill didn't know what he was talking about. But you definitely see aspects of faith that are involved. I think, I actually tell you the truth, from my understanding is he would have converted the founder of AA, but he wanted to keep it open to all denominations, not have particular denomination control it. Because he wanted to kind of keep it open, which I guess kind of makes sense reasonably, but also, again, it's sort of like that. Well, if you have the truth, then why wouldn't you? But I mean, I don't know. There were different influences there. Like I know there was a professor we had at the seminary who taught Latin, and he was not a Catholic. He actually, I think, was a Church of God in Christ, and came from a line of those ministers. His grandfather, father. And I remember sitting in Latin class one day, and then we were practicing the Hail Mary, and talking about Mary, and he's out of the blue said, "Oh, I love Mary so much," and we're just like, "Hey, wait a minute! Don't you believe in that?" We're like, "Well, yeah." And it's like he told us, it was like, actually, I'd be Catholic now if it weren't for my family. And I can understand that, but also, be not afraid, right?
Bring it with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the influences we have in our world are very, very powerful, right? That keep people from actually fully engaging in these ways. And sometimes we can reason ourselves out of it and say, well, for this reason or another, I'm not going to fully convert, or not lose my faith, or whatever. Okay, okay. But I mean, in the same way, I had a buddy of mine who I worked with at Boeing, and he was a Huguenot. For those who don't know what Huguenot, they're basically atheistic. They're kind of like came out of the French Revolution, and even though there's some Christian background, there's not necessarily. I don't even know if he understood his own faith. So, but he married a good Catholic girl, and they're raising their children Catholic and awesome. And he's kind of on the cusp, right? But every time I would approach him with this, he would always say, "Well, what about the deathbed thing, right? Yeah, I'm that last hour guy in the field, right? So I can just like confirm my deathbed." It's like, yeah, man, that's great if you know when that is.
Yeah.
Right? If you know exactly when that is, yeah, no problem. Same thing with this Latin teacher. It's like, cool, but like, how do you know you're going to walk out of here and get hit by a bus or something, or a train, right? I mean,
Have a heart attack.
yeah, So it's interesting. I'm still working on them, though. You know who you are. Coming for you. We'll probably see you again on Christmas, I'm sure. Yeah.
Have you had any favorable responses to your phone calls?
Oh, yeah. You mean for OCIA?
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm presenting it as adult faith formation, right? So in other words, that kind of opens up not just the non-Catholics, anyone, right? I mean, we can all grow more in our faith for sure, our understanding of Jesus and his church. But I've been concentrating calling non-Catholic parties in the parish, and it was in the Bulletin article this last week and going forward. At last count, I think I have 37 names, and I still have about 24 names to go. So I've been adding to that list every day. And so the way I present this is, this isn't, it's a way to learn more about the faith, the Christian faith. Also, for the school family especially, it's a way to learn more about what their children are learning. But also, if you engage with it and stick with it, it's also an opportunity to become Catholic if you desire. But I'm very quick to say there's no obligation to do that. Because the other thing too is this is kind of a long game. If out of those, let's say the final number is, let's say, 40, whatever. If of those 40 we get 8 people, or 5 people, or 2 people, good, or 1 person, good. It was not in vain. And if all those 40 people walk away with at least some better understanding of the faith, good. Or can engage their children better in what they're learning in school, good. And we'll try again next year then. We'll probably call the same families and say, hey, you want to come back? So that's kind of what my approach is with these things. I did talk to Don, who's running our kind of the coordinator for our OCA, and we're going to probably have a discussion this week about what we may do coming up, because 40 may be a big number, and we may divvy that up in some way. We're going to talk about it, figure it out. But no, it's been fruitful, which is helpful. So let's pray for them going forward and see if we can get a few bites out of them, a few Catholics coming out of them. Some of them are also already baptized Catholic. We're going to complete their initiation. So I think those guys are going to kind of go through it. I think we have about maybe 4 of those. So we should have 4 by the end, but who knows? Obviously, people have to discern their own rate, right, and hear God's call for them personally. So, but we'll keep you informed as we go forward. But yeah, they've been fruitful. So.
Well, I got involved with our ICA as it was known then, just for educational purposes for myself, because it had been since grade school, because I went to a public high school, that I'd had any kind of training, extended training. So that's how I got back with it. And then I was in my 4th year, and it's always been a learning experience. And there are people out there who have a lot of questions, and they just need a place to go and where they can that they can listen to you, but they can also know that they can ask questions and let you know what they're thinking. And I don't know, I enjoy it.
Yeah, no, I think it's beneficial. Well, that's what I'm saying. I think it's good just for not just for non-Catholic, but for anybody. So it's open to anyone. So come on by after 8 o'clock mass, starting on August 18th through spring till Easter, which I think our last class I think is scheduled for April 13th, 2025. We'll take a break for Christmas and Thanksgiving, but otherwise every Sunday, starting the 18th of August.
So what time is that?
So it'll be right after the 8 o'clock mass.
What time is that?
Yeah, I think we're saying like 9.
8:45.
I think we said 9:15 in the bulletin, but it's like,
I didn't see a time. In the
well,
bulletin.
I think it was up
10,
between
15,
bulletin.
or like how long is it each Sunday?
It's about an hour.
Okay.
I mean, sometimes we go a little bit long. We are kind of hindered in the fact we have a 10 o'clock mass, and I actually have a communion call at 10, so I got to be gone at 10 to bring communion to somebody. But I'll be back if we keep on going. Keep on.
You have a 10 o'clock mass?
No, 10 o'clock communion call.
Oh,
So.
You said mass.
Oh, sorry, no, not mass, communion call. So.
Yeah, 11 o'clock. Right.
11 o'clock mass. So we're kind of within those guideposts. I would say even last year we went maybe an hour and a half at the maximum.
You have to be out of there by a certain time. For
Right.
another group.
Right. There's another group comes in. So yeah, I would say at the most an hour. Now sometimes also we'd have like a church tour or something else, maybe some extended time. But those are kind of few and far between. But we definitely wouldn't go.
We go ahead
before like
and
10:45.
start. We don't
Right.
always wait for somebody that might be a little tardy.
Where do you meet?
Down in the assembly room,
Which is
the room between the rectory and the parish center, down here in the bottom. Yeah.
Small room
So if you come down the parish center to the door there and make a immediate left, these 2 double doors, that's the assembly.
Oh, okay. Where
Yeah.
they sold tickets for
Yes,
the fish
for the fish
fry.
fry, right?
Okay.
Yes.
I'm just
Yeah.
learning
Right.
the names.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. So now we may move into the parish center if we get too big. 'Cause I don't know if we're going to be able to fit everyone in that room. So we'll make that a game time decision on the 18th to see how big we are, and then kind of determine if we need to move into the bigger room or not. I imagine with 40 plus with the catechist, that might be a little tight in the assembly room, so we may have to move in the parish center. But we'll make that call on the 18th and see who shows up on that.
Is there any big differences between the rite and the order?
No, it's just
Sorry,
more of
it
a
took you for a
term.
moment.
No, it's just a term. I mean,
They're changing them all from rite to order.
yeah, and it kind of is more in the ancient way, because they used to have like order of catechumens, order of candidates, order of elect,
Right.
order of penitents. So it's really more kind of get in line with what the church was doing, in the early years and into the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. So I think the rite came from kind of Vatican II. And there's nothing wrong. It's still a rite. It's still RITE. It's just that it's I think it's just more in line with the tradition of the church.
I just wondered if there
Yeah.
was any
No,
big differences.
so the process is the same basically. Now there is a new rite book for the order, which we've ordered it. I don't think we
I
received it
think
yet.
it comes in September.
That's probably right. So that just goes in line with like more of the rite of the elect, the rite of sending, the rite of even the rite of Easter Vigil, of doing those liturgies. So that I don't know what the changes are yet. I haven't seen it. But once I get the book, I'll read through it and see what the difference. I imagine most of it's probably an issue of translation. So, like for instance, the blessing of the water is different now in the missal and in the rite of baptism than it is for OCIA. So the rite of OCIA actually takes the blessing of the water the same way the old rite book for baptism had it.
Okay.
So I imagine that's going to be in line with the
Yeah.
current rite of
Yeah.
baptism. But as far as the essential rites, so like the form, for instance, of baptism, it's going to be the same, right?
Still do the exorcism.
Well, now I don't know. That might be
Okay.
yeah. So I mean, talk about the essential form. So, for instance, the form of the sacrament of baptism, I baptize you in the name of the Father and of the Son and the Holy Spirit. That's not going to change. The form of the sacrament of confirmation is be sealed with the gift of the Holy Spirit. Peace be with you. That's not going to change, right? This is my body. This is my blood. That's not going to change. Yeah. So now, what does the other form that's around it? Might, because like what I'm looking at as an example would be what the current rite of baptism does compared to the old form. I imagine that's all going to be in line now. So like the words that are said for the blessing of water, the actual like words they use for like the anointings, they all changed in the new rite of baptism.
Yeah.
So I imagine they're going to be the same for the OCIA.
Yeah.
Right. So that's going to be the main differences, I think.
Okay, just like the words of absolution and
Yeah.
reconciliation.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So even the words of absolution, the essential form is still the same.
Yeah.
I absolve you in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. That's it. Right. So yeah. So I imagine that's what we're going to be most of it's about. But it'll be interesting to see what they do if they do anything different, like the rite of sending, or like the rite of election, or the rite of acceptance, because those are all different rites in the, the formation process. I don't know. That might be interesting to see what they do anything different for that. They might. So we'll see.
I thought maybe you had an inside peek. No.
I probably could. I mean, I can call the Office of Worship, be like, hey, what are the changes? I'm sure you can send me a PDF, all that stuff in it. But I'll cross that bridge when I come to it.
Fair enough.
Yeah. Right. Great. All right.
Alright, so next month, Mary.
Next week we'll talk about Mary and the Assumption. And yeah, so otherwise, have a great night. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Pizza order.